start the recording
You're
here.
like, oh, start,
I'm like,
start,
oh,
whatever
oh
the
God,
content.
but content. Um, okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Double D Design. I'm Demon,
Dragon.
and yeah, last time we talked about maps. Lots of maps. Maps are fun. Um, and I think there was a good segue at the end there, talking about countries and my overabundance of them, and Dragon, your I don't want to say lack of countries, but you know, you don't
No,
necessarily
call it
build
what it
them.
is. Call it what it is. I don't have countries. That's cool.
And so for the thing that you don't do, not as far ahead of time as I do anyway, nation building. I think the general question here, obviously, is a homebrew environment, right? Because if you had a module or whatever, you're not doing any of the nation building. Well, maybe you are a little bit, but how do you go about constructing or building a nation? So, Dragon, I want to hear about uh, your method, with how you kind of build things with your players.
um, yeah, very much. I mean, I'm saying the same old song and dance from the last couple episodes is building around your players in a way, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, the world I'm dealing with, we got a couple different nations we talked about during the map building episode,
Yep.
Saint Celeste and Asmar and that kind of stuff. My players are not interested in political intrigue. That's not their thing, right? So that's one note that kind of keys me in.
Sure.
Uh, they also really like exploration. I've
Yep.
got some D100 random tables. They love that kind of stuff. I'm like, hey, roll a D100, and I give them the hint that like, hey, this is what's going to happen next.
Yep.
You're determining your fate. They love that. And ancient ruins, forests, swamps, like they like finding things and they love randomness. So that's kind of why I chose to go to a colonial, um, less defined type environment where there's maybe some ancient stuff,
Yep.
and a lot of wilderness and a lot of openness. So um, nation building really around the players and how they're going to play the game. If they were into political intrigue, I would definitely be forced into a whole bunch of work.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, that is a ton of
Because
work.
honestly, I've already built all the stuff that they're dealing with, all the random things,
Right.
and also some of the broad strokes. But if they really wanted to get into some political intrigue and relationships and that kind of stuff, that would be a whole nother level that I'd have to get into. So
Yeah.
I like to do it very much around what the players are expecting. So
You
not
know,
expecting, but you know what I mean.
well, something that what they enjoy doing and what they want to play the game for, which is not like you said, political intrigue. So you are a little more reactive, right?
For sure, for sure. I don't. Yeah, I'm not pre-planning too much, but I'm not also just flying by the seat of my pants. I do try to have a framework there. If they do get into political intrigue, I can flex into that,
Yeah.
or something, or if they want to get into social constructs, they want to get into caste systems, they want to get into something a little more specific to a nation. Uh, we can flex that way.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, and for me, nation building is in the same vein, right? It's for the players, but I think I discussed this in map building, right? Is I build both for myself and for the players, because I expect I will run this world through multiple different parties. Um, and I have done that. I'm on God campaign 6 or 7 in this world. Um, and every party is different. Like some, like yours, don't care for that political intrigue, but others like love that shit. That is their bread and butter. And for me, I think I like to build in that almost flexibility in a way ahead of time. Like, hey, this is a general outline of what this country is. Just pick an example here. So the Ashlands. That's the land that Dragon you and your fellow players are in right now. This is this
Yes.
is vampire country. Okay. Now where is it? Right. So I'll build the continent and then I'll draw all the the lines of like, well, do I want to do this geographically? Do I want to do it around a city? Um, you know, and I like to build off of history in a sense. So taking cues from like the Holy Roman Empire, right? Back in the day, that used to be all part of Rome or Germania, and I was like informed by history when I was building my world, and I said, okay, I want this continent to be a continent-wide empire that has broken apart, and not all of the borders in the Holy Roman Empire made too much sense or were made sense geographically. So I kind of, with the Ashland specifically, I was like, well, okay, it's gonna be up against the ocean, but it's not gonna have any other real geographic borders other than just kind of a bunch of lines that some random person decided was the way it was. Because that shit happens all the time in real life.
Yeah, it's a fact.
You know, driving through towns that you have no reason why they should exist there. You know, that makes things easier for me. But uh, you know, you can explain things away like that, or you can use them as a baseline because sometimes players do things that are unexpected, and I like having
That,
that framework available to be flexible. It's like if you guys wanted to leave the Ashlands and head west into the Principality of Darlor, I'd be like, oh, I don't have to do too much work because I've already built out that nation a little bit. So in a sense, it's I'm trying to be proactive versus your reactive, if that makes sense.
yeah.
And I like to build kind of macro to micro. So yeah, I'll have the borders, and then I'll go to cities like the capital city, and then I'll go to villages, and then I'll build. You know, if I have a map available to me, you know, I'll build roads, and then I'll build different smaller areas. Like, oh, this area has mines. This area is hills, so there's a river here, or you know, based on geographically where it is, this town does you know, has a bunch of vineyards and wineries, uh, or hey, this is by a volcano, and that would, I think, the geography really helps me inform those kind of macro, uh, like map side decisions, and then on to like government stuff, right? So
Yeah.
in the Ashlands, it's ruled by the Blood Queen, who is this kind of ancient, presumably a vampire. Um, that
Presumably.
presumably,
I'm pretty sure she is,
yeah,
but okay, we'll find out.
yeah. And then I start going from there. Well, she has a court, the Blood Court. Okay, who's in the court? Well, all these different families. Okay, and then using that information, that kind of macro, I can start populating the capital city, and I can start populating the shops, and I can start populating the villages, and then I can start populating uh, the village chiefs or the nobles of the area. I don't know, and I kind of like having those very oh gosh, I don't want to put this, like the very not necessarily static things, but the very concrete. Like, yes, this person is in charge of this place. Uh, and then I can apply a theme later if I want to. Like, this is Vampire Land. Okay, so all the NPCs are vampires. Um, you know, if the situation or the map part warrants it. Um, and now I think the question for me to you would be, uh, obviously these things, it depends on your players. It depends on who you are as a DM and what amount of work you're willing to put in. But if you were to have a minimum level of information as a DM uh, for just any given party, doesn't matter whether they're political intrigue or not. What do you think your preparation levels should be, or just what do you do?
Oh gosh, minimum level
Mm-hmm.
for a nation?
Yeah, you could say nothing.
Well, things that I want to, and really, these aren't even things that the players even know unless they start asking, right?
Right, right.
And I know you're very well versed in that, doing tons of detail that we never get to as your players.
Yep,
But for my players, the things that come up would be the leader, of course,
yep.
like who is the king, who's the lord, who's the duke. For example, uh, the city that my players had just left, Heffield, Lord Heffield actually, the sixth, and he was, I had all these small details about him.
Uh-huh.
They never met Lord Heffield, but they met his guards, and they met the people in the town who talked kind of bad about him. He was kind of a buffoon. He was rich, liked to spend his time playing military drills and games and pretending he was a military mastermind, and he really was just, fat, lazy dude. Um, but that piece, they never found out. They never talked to him. They never met him. They never saw him.
Yep.
But it informed how all the people around them behaved. And that seems like it's like way too intricate to like execute, but it's really not,
Yeah.
right? When my players walk in to the city, I know how the guards are going to behave. They've got low morale.
Yep.
They know that their lord is a kind of a douchebag, right? Like they
Yeah.
know that that's a thing, and they're not committed to their work. But he also has a lot of power because he has friends in high places,
Yeah.
beyond his small, almost like a feudal system in a way, but
Yep.
beyond his county. Really, elsewhere he has people he answers to, so they do still fear him due to his power. So, how much detail? That sounds like a lot of detail. It really does, and it kind of is.
Yeah.
But when you execute, it's just informing how you build the things that the players are going to interact with. Now, if they told me, "Hey, we're going to break into the keep and kill the king," man, I got to get smart real quick on what all that is. That's where my lack of preparation actually is going to get me. But my players don't do that.
Right.
They're not murder hobos, and they're they're more prone to believing bad guys are good guys, which is really weird. But
That's
okay.
interesting. You know, they have a little
Um,
bit of faith,
yeah,
which is not a bad
yeah.
thing. But
When
it's good that your the way you build it informs the environment, as in, like you said, that's what they interact with.
Yeah. A previous area that I dealt with was there was a war between, not really a war, but there was an invading army of orcs from the north. You kind of stereotypical stuff. The predominant population there was elven, and the elven uh, militaries in that area were doing a counterattack kind of thing.
Yep.
And both of my players, actually, all three of my, well, both of my players at the time were elves, and so I didn't really get into details. We didn't talk about why it was happening. We didn't talk about who the leaders were. We didn't talk about much of anything other than they ran into a scouting party at some point. There were elves, and they're like, "Hey, why are you not like helping with the great cause? What are you doing?"
Yep.
Which is an interesting thing for them, and they actually went out to pursue it later. They're like, "Oh, we want to get into it," and they got distracted by something else. But
Oh, that
the point
happens.
is, these wars are great catalysts for events and detail and things that maybe you're missing in your campaign. If it's
Yeah.
too basic and you feel like, oh, well, I've built a typical medieval RPG. Well, what's happening in it? Is there a war? Is there a plague? Is there an influx of a new race? From someplace. You got Get Yankee is the first thing that comes to mind.
Yep.
Um, Extra planar stuff. What's the catalyst for what's happening in your countries or in the nations that you happen to be dealing with?
Yeah, I think it's really important as a DM to have an idea of what conflicts are going on in your nation. It's all well and good to have that static information of, this is the Lord, this is the border, this is the capital city, this is who's in charge. But it doesn't mean anything to anybody until you can kind of set a conflict, which is then your story hook to get players interested in. And whether they pursue something immediately or not, I think that's important to have in the back pocket. And if they don't pursue it, you can just stash it for later. There's no problem with being able to reattack something when they bypass it.
Definitely. And really, you can also reallocate it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If you have an event or you have some sort of interesting conflict that your players bypass, just try to think of it in a new way, and you can inject it later in a different location.
I th-
That's the beauty of being the DM, and it is
right.
your world. You can do whatever you want, and they won't know the difference.
I think that reveals more of the flexibility of your style of nation building or not, in the sense that I have everything fairly well set. And like you said, DMs, we can just rewrite stuff. That's what we do. But I find it a little bit more difficult to repurpose something or move it if I think it has a specific theme or if I think it belongs in a certain place. It's a little bit tougher for me personally to uproot it, change NPC names, or maybe slightly change the theme of something. But if you have an idea that you want to use, and the area that you're in, doesn't allow you to, or you don't think as the DM that you should do it, then yeah, you have the option to store it for later and maybe push the players in that direction later, or just repurpose it and slightly change it or tweak it to make it fit, or at least you know you think it fits, and that's good enough for you. And I'm sure the players won't even notice.
So another thing that I think gets into this, where we talk about where the players interact, where do they start to learn about these things? Factions and patrons, right?
Ooh, yeah, that's important.
Um, I actually put more effort into those than I do the nation itself, because it's a lot closer to where they are, and that's
Yeah.
these little hooks. I almost think of it as like fishing,
Yep.
uh, and I've got like 8 fishing poles, and I'm gonna throw them all out and see which one they bite. You know,
Yep.
I'm gonna go through and say, hey, here's like a skullduggery thieves guild kind of faction, and somebody who's active in the country or the region or the area, and here's some pirates, and here's the native like population, that because it's colonial, right? So here's
Yeah.
here's some of the people who've been here longer than the other races that have showed up. Whatever, just picking some of those factions, patrons, other things
Yeah.
smaller than the country. Yeah, there's a king. Got it. There's a king, and he's showed up, and he's doing things. But what are they going to interact with day to day? It may be those smaller segments of society.
Right. And in our campaign, you guys have already run into one of those factions, the People's Party.
Yep.
The hey, we're all human or Dampier, essentially cattle for these vampires. We want to break free from the vampires and either kill them all or push them out of the land, or at least get some sort of democracy set up. Um, and yeah, it's important to have those factions, as part of that nation. Everything. If your nation has a theme, then you can maybe even make that faction more thematically appropriate. Like, you know, uh, sure, you have a kind of a workers' party, right? Like a almost like a communist party sort of thing. Like everybody's equal, and we're gonna free ourselves from the overlords. But then it's like, well, actually, now there's vampires involved. Okay, cool. Not only are we all equal, except for the vampires. The vampires are the evil guys. They represent everything that's wrong with society, and they eat us. Like, it's a little more of
Yeah.
immediate. You can add that immediate threat, and maybe add that twist for the party to be able to explore, make it unique. To that area, gives that flexibility to play around with. And um, what are the for you? You keep mentioning, you enjoy that player level uh, work, and I'm definitely an enjoyer of that player level work. Nation building. Every part of every nation is towns and cities and villages. How do you go about, other than like, oh, I think the players will like this. How do you go about making like a town?
Oh gosh. I mean, uh, that's a lot. I mean, it kind of gets into it bridges into a lot of different topics. I think you could do a whole episode on that. But the broad strokes for me are size,
Yep.
right? Is this a metropolis? Is it a city? Is it a village? What does that look like?
Yep.
Um, and within a country, within nation building, I'm looking at, is this a capital city,
Yep.
or does a capital city even fit this society?
Yeah.
Which may not necessarily be true for whatever you're dealing with, but in this situation, typically is it a capital city? And then if it is not a capital city, what's the purpose?
Yeah.
And I don't think that necessarily mirrors real life all that well, because sometimes towns are built, and the reason they were built is forgotten, and people live there now, and
Yeah.
they commute an hour to the nearest big city to work, so they're just kind of there. that's not what I'm dealing with typically in my mind in these fantasy type worlds. I really want to have something bold, something that stands out, some big reason. Here's the capital city. This village around the corner that's difficult to get to. Oh, that's like a thieves' haven.
Yeah.
There's another place down the coast, and that's where the werewolves are. And there's something about those cities, towns, villages, whichever they are, that's unique. That's a hook, something that grabs the player's attention and builds it into that nation in a way
Right.
that they go, oh, if we go back to, God, I don't remember what the name of my. I had a rogue based like skullduggery
Sure.
underworld type village,
Yep.
and I don't remember what it was called, but they knew if they went there, yeah, they was in for some thieving and such. So
Yeah.
making those unique locations within your country, so each city should have a very strong character, and the way I see it, exaggerated in a way. It's almost like theatrics, theater,
Right.
or whatever. Characters are not necessarily entirely realistic. It is a
Yeah.
fantasy world after all.
I was actually gonna bring that up, right? Is that between towns, villages, and cities, and then countries, it's important for them to have some sort of character, something memorable, so that the players will at least remember the adventures they had in the long run. Or, oh hey, yeah, I remember the city of Necroy is the capital, and this is all the crazy things that we did there. Or, oh well, we heard stories about the town of Lupadure on the edge of the forest, and uh, I think it not only drives those hooks as DMs, but for players it drives that curiosity, like you mentioned, of oh maybe we'll be in for this, and it sets an expectation.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. It reminds me of your that same topic. One of the cities we spent a lot of time in your previous campaign when I was a player was Chumya,
Yes. Yep.
and it was a entire city built on stilts, basically across a river delta,
Yep.
and lots of water, lots of nautical kind of themes, but also it was plagued by disease.
Yep.
So severe disease, which is the whole reason the players were there in the first place, is to kind of address that in a way. There's some other things going on too. More your depth of detail for nation building reflected in how we played through that. But the point of this is Chumya, the city, was memorable. I knew what it was. And from the beginning, you could say like two sentences and tell me what it is, and I can remember it. That was pretty cool.
Which is huge to hear as a DM, right? Because a lot of times you don't necessarily get this feedback. Um, Always as a DM solicit feedback where from your players or from fellow DMs who have heard your stories or sitting around nearby or playing in your game. What do they think and what do they want? And it's good to shape the world to the players like you do. But that's great for me to hear that you still remember the city of Chumia. That was like well over a year ago now, and
I also built a
I'm
rather detailed map of
you
it. So,
did, you did.
yeah,
It's a little unfair, but
yeah.
the point still stands that that it means that I did a good job building that city and making it memorable, and then you also did a good job making that map, which was displayed in last episode.
I
Um,
think I this may be too deep, but I think of it, or not too deep. That sounds really pretentious. Let me take a deep breath. I think it may be like go back to like 1920s like cinema, right? And you look at the actors on the screen, and if you went back and looked at them without the cameras and without the poor quality and stuff, they did over the top makeup. Their makeup looks ridiculous in real life, but they get on the camera and it makes sense. It's kind of the same way I feel about building things for my players to interact with. I'm going to make it ridiculous, over the top, and they're going to look at it through their lens,
yeah.
which is going to be interesting to them. I'm going to put tons of makeup on that bad guy. It's going to be over the top ridiculous. Not necessarily ridiculous, but you know what I mean. It's going to be strong,
No, I
strong
love that.
overtones. And to them, maybe it doesn't come across. Maybe it isn't as strong and noteworthy as I think it is. And maybe they're like, "Oh, dang, this dude is crazy," or "This person looks amazing," or "This place is magical." Like that's okay. Go in leaning a little bit radical.
Yeah,
Um,
that's
at
huge.
least that you know
I love that metaphor. That's great. I think a good thing if you're gonna have players go interact with or fight with or just deal with a like a community leader or a mob boss or somebody of that high stature. I think it's important to set the environment around that person. On the lens of nation building, when you deal with a head of state or that level of character, not only make that character memorable, but make the area around them memorable. You guys had spent some time last campaign in an underwater city, and in the middle of that city was a giant spire where the head of state like lived and worked, and he was also like a religious figurehead. But like, I made sure to be like, yeah, this guy, he's in this big black coral tower, and it's spiraling up into the ocean, and I made sure to describe, how high you had to climb or swim in this case to get to this guy's office, and how ornate his office was, and it's important to uh, make that character kind of larger than life. And I think environmental storytelling is really really important to kind of drive that point home.
Definitely, and that's something that, again, we don't have to sit here and stroke each other's egos, but your ability to do that is actually uh, pretty strong. Uh, the environmentals, what kind of things do people see? And I like to look at it this way too: the or your senses, right?
Yeah,
Uh, what do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? What kind of things are going on around you? How does the air feel? Those
yeah,
things, you describe those things as you walk into a king's chamber. What does that look like, and who is there? What
right,
kind of weapons are there? And pick out those things that stand out as you describe that stuff, and think about the leader of this nation. Is it somebody who is full of pomp and circumstance?
right,
Are they wearing purple robes and they have servants around them, or is it something more communal? Say you're in my players are about to enter into the Great Wood in the city of Calimbel, which is Elven.
yep,
It's going to be less of that and more communal.
yeah,
You've got an ancient community of elves who have lived there for who knows how long.
right,
They're very much, if you meet the royalty there, they're part of the community at a more horizontal level. This isn't necessarily a vertical society. This is a very flat society.
right,
The way I'm trying to build it, so there won't be as much of that, and the players may not know that they're talking to the king or
yeah,
queen or whatever I decide to make it.
yep.
So I'm getting there. They've still got to. I think I have probably 3 sessions before they reach Calimbel.
And honestly, 3 sessions could be 3 days, or it could be like a month and a
Yeah.
half.
Who knows? Who
You
knows?
as the DM have to be able to schedule that time to build that area
Yeah.
up. To get ready for them. Um, and yeah, I think it's really important distinguishing. How those environmentals for a country. So like for example, if your players walk into a capital city, is it some shining city with beautiful alabaster walls, and everybody's all happy and the morale is high, or are you walking into a war-torn dark area, and it's when they first show up it's like storming and there's like fires because they're under siege, and the king is wearing his armor, or or else the council elder is wearing a simple woolen tunic. Like those environmentals are really important to kind of give. I think it's very easy for people to like stereotype in a way, but also you do that in the lens of tabletops. Is like, oh, if the capital city is like squalid, then man, what's the state of the country I'm in? Is it because of corrupt nobles? Is it because of they've been at war, or they've been hit by a plague? And I think that gives a lot of options for you as a DM to really set the tone, set the atmosphere of not just the city, town, whatever, but the entire nation as well.
Definitely.
So, in this your elven city case, right? It's not truly a nation necessarily, right? Describe it a little
Yeah.
bit for me.
So uh, this is a pine type forest.
Uh huh.
It's on the eastern side of a large mountain range and the the flows of the weather go east to west,
Uh huh.
so the moisture falls on the eastern side.
Yep.
There, the way I see it is this is a difficult one for me because I'm trying to bridge out from the traditional feudal, medieval type, you know, traditional fantasy.
Sure.
But this one is supposed to be relatively low population,
Uh huh.
so it's not a bustling city, but more of a quiet city, if you will,
Mhm.
with folks that have been interacting with each other for hundreds of years potentially. I'm not crazy about the lifespan of elves being like thousands of years or immortal even. That's not kind of how I want it in my world. It's going to be several hundred years, but even that is going to give a sense of slowed reproduction, slowed growth, and slowed society in a lot of ways. So
Right.
that's how I view this nation. Is that very much they're very protected.
Yep.
Uh, they're reclusive, kind of xenophobic in a way. Um, that's kind of how I'm building this to be. And when they go in, the players are going to be a little bit surprised that they aren't as welcome as they are in a very diverse and crazy town such as Eastbrook. The one that's very much like Las Vegas and San Antonio mixed together. Just some
Yeah.
craziness. They're going to get into Gallumbell and find out. They're welcome. They're not told to leave, but it's not home.
Right.
They're going to feel quite like, hey, what are you doing here? What do you want? Thank you, and leave. They're watched.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
I think as a DM that is enough information to work on. Um, obviously, it depends on the level of players that you have and what they want. But I think it's important to remember that DM burnout is real, and not everybody has the time or the resources or the energy to put more than that into it at a time until you get right there. And that's not a bad thing. You don't have to be like me, who's sitting here typing away for hours at a time, like, oh my
yeah.
god, I have to make this just right, and I have to name every single lord and lady and family. Like, you don't have to do that. You really don't.
You don't, but if you enjoy it, do it.
Yes, yes. If it do what you enjoy, and if your players don't enjoy what you do, and if you don't want to adapt or completely change your ways, then you can always find a new playgroup, or you can work together and find something that all of you enjoy, which is the preferable choice. Always work together.
For sure. For
It's
sure.
it should not be DM versus players. It should never be that.
No. No, no,
Unless
no, no.
you go into it knowing that the players are level 20 and it's just an infinite dungeon crawl, then sure, okay, then it is because you're not going to play a whole campaign that way. But I mean, if you
Yeah.
are, then good for you, but
Yeah. Depends on what your players want to get out of it. We know there are multiple types,
yeah,
and there's some that want that, and that's okay. But those aren't, I'll be honest, those aren't the types of games that I want to run.
right.
So,
And
you know,
so when you're a DM or aspiring DM, make sure that you are aware of what your playgroup wants. And if they want something that you don't want to run as a DM, you don't have to do that. Peer pressure is not something you should give into.
definitely.
Set those boundaries early. Um, even before the game starts. I asked my players before we started this recent campaign of like, hey, what do you guys want and what do you guys not want? And sometimes people just either don't have an opinion or they feel very strongly and they say, "Hey, we don't want political intrigue." And then maybe the nation building doesn't necessarily matter so much, but then some other players are like, "Yes, I want to start a revolution and take over this country." And like, "Oh, okay, I guess I should know who you need to kill to do that."
Yeah. Yep. And not, oh gosh, I lost my train of thought there.
Uh-oh, that's okay. The train will probably come back to the station at some point. Um,
Derailed.
and speaking of, if you're in a country, in a nation that you as the DM have built, and you really, 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 really want to play in that nation, um, try not to railroad your players. If you like the nation enough, then you should fill it with enough. interesting aspects and story hooks to keep them there rather than railroading them. Don't I try not to railroad people as a DM until even I try not to, but sometimes it happens like at the very very end of the last campaign when time became a factor, and that like is kind of an artificial set of tracks. But if you really want the players to do something, then you as the DM should put in that effort and work to make it interesting enough for them to want to do it, and also for them to not know that you're doing that to them. If that makes any sense.
For sure, it does. I do remember what I was going to get at.
Send it.
I'm going to circle back. I am so sorry. Things happen. Whatever. So your players, you actually are dealing with a player group that you know very well.
Yes.
So there's a huge difference between running a player group that you know very well and you have a pretty good idea what they're going to do versus a group of friends that you know very well that you're going to run a game for maybe,
Yep.
but you don't know how they're going to want to play.
For sure.
Just because you know that, like, oh, this is my best friend John. Well, you don't know if John's going to want dungeon crawl. And you can ask him. It doesn't matter. You're not going to see it until like you play and get that out of them.
Yeah.
So you have the opportunity to run with us, your players,
Yep.
for your campaign that you know very well, and you can nation build to a point that you know that we will enjoy.
Yeah.
So I wonder over time the different groups that you've run, how has it changed for you when it comes
Ooh.
to nation building, or has it changed?
Absolutely. So I'm gonna go way, 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 way back to when I first started as a DM in 11th grade in high school. My first ever tabletop RPG was the Star Wars D20 system, and I started not with a module or anything like that. I wrote my own story, and it was trash. You have to start somewhere, and you're not going to be great at it when you first start. Just get used to that, DMs. Uh, but I had a general understanding of the lore of Star Wars, and I was like, hey, I know Tatooine is Sand World, and it has Mos Eisley and Tusken Raiders. Woohoo! Great. um, and that's all I needed to know because that's all my players gave a shit about. Now, this world in Levia, me and my buddy started this world 2017, and we built it as a the Empire had just fallen apart, had just crumbled. But as far as we built it was like this is West Enlevia, this is East Enlevia, and this is Draconia and Robert Air. There were like four countries. That was it, and then everything else had a very nebulous understanding of what it was, and that's as far as I gave a shit. I was like, I only know that they're gonna be in this city, and the people that I was playing with, I didn't know very well. Let's see, I had two people that I went to college with, and then I had two guys that I was working with at the time. They weren't even so I'm an American. They weren't even American. They were English guys. They were British, and I didn't know them very well. I only knew them well enough to be like, "Hey, you guys want to play some Dungeons and Dragons?" And they were like, yeah." And I can't even. I'm not gonna do an accent because I'll offend somebody, I'm sure. But um, but yeah, I went in and I was like, the basic premise of the story was that the Empire had fallen apart, and because of that, uh, all of the people that used to be part of the Empire had demanded its demilitarization. They were going to pay reparations for what happened during the Civil War, and their land was reduced, and every city was led by an apothecary. And this council of apothecaries ran the Imperial Remnant. It was like 12 people. And I was like, okay, I don't know any of their names. I don't really care, except for the one guy that they're going to interact with right at the beginning, who's going to give them their quest. And it's Apothecary. I actually forget his name, but it was based on like the fall of the Roman Empire. So he had a very Roman name. Um, and it was him and his consort, and she was a vampire. I have a thing for vampires apparently. I haven't used them in like 3 campaigns, but you're all listeners are seeing a pattern, I'm sure. Um, hearing a pattern. Yeah, I guess that makes more sense. But anyway, so that was as far as I cared about. Was like this is the city. Um, and if they have to move somewhere, then they'll figure out a way to walk because they were really low level. And they managed a journey of like 700 miles or some crap, and I was like, it was very nebulous. I was making it like right before the session, and they enjoyed it because all they cared about was like killing things, but not in a murder hobo sort of way. They wanted the combat of it more than the RP of it, so I kind of got away with it. And as I evolved with this current play group and the play group just before you, Dragon, was that like, oh my god, I enjoy world building and nation building in the sense of like, oh hey, this country is a kingdom, this country is a principality, this country is a republic, and looking at the kind of real world options, available options, I suppose, and comparing them to like what I think would be fun or what would be interesting, and then applying those to the nations there. Uh, and as I built the world and got more excited about the world, that I think if you are excited about what you were doing, that excitement will show in your game prep or in your long haul sort of campaign length and what little snippets of information that don't really matter, but the players will ask for anyway because they see that you, as the DM, are interested in it. So yeah, the philosophy for nation building has changed over time, in that as I grow excited about creating, I want to share that creation and but also have the detail, and this is certainly my pride talking, the detail to be, uh, specific, but also the detail to be like, oh wow, I'm as a player am very surprised that you as the DM had that answer so fast, and oh, I'm really interested in this thing that you just spouted off in this random street crier. As you're walking down the street, he's yelling about country X and war Y. So yeah, I think I've definitely grown from that. Hey, whatever, I'll figure it out as I go. To hey, I need to have this detail not only for player enjoyment but for my own enjoyment, and to inform the world and make it more believable in a sense. I know that was a lot, but that's kind of the answer
No,
to that question.
that is a huge boon of what you do, or the positive side of how you, or the not the only positive side. You do amazing work, but
See what you're saying.
I
I
have a
see it.
I have a I have a different approach. I have a different approach,
Yeah, of
but
course.
that is the benefit of how you do it, with the amount of prep that you do and the amount of stuff that you put in. Is like, boom, you snap it off. Here's what's going on. When we ask a random question about some religion, you know that it's tied to like three different gods in the background and all this craziness. That is, and as a player, that is really, it's two things. It's interesting, and it means I can explore more, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Which is pretty cool, which means, oh, there's more here. I can find it.
Yeah.
He's giving me a teaser. It's like a breadcrumb. The other thing is that it's it shows that you've got caring for the world. You're not just making it up. I mean, you are, but it doesn't come across to the players that way, right? Like, oh, dang, there is a system. You know,
Yeah.
that's where that prep. That's where the level of nation building, world building, religions, everything, whatever. Not religions necessarily, but gods and factions and all those things. When you get the nitnoid details, which I struggle with, um, that's, man, that's huge for the players. And I will say this: it's part of the reason I struggle with pre-mades.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So a pre-made campaign, because I get into one of those and I'm like, oh gosh, how much stuff do I as a DM have to memorize? Because if you
Yeah.
look at a typical, I mean, I have a full-time job. It is what it is. How
Yeah.
much time do I take to prep in a week? And I think, man, I need to know all this stuff. They could ask about any of these myriad of things.
Yep.
How far do I need to prep for a pre-made? I
Oh, for
struggle with that
sure.
because I don't want to, because I'm in somebody else's world. If I have my own world, I have that flexibility to change on the fly, and sometimes I got to answer for stupid decisions I made.
Yeah.
And sometimes we lack that level of dedication, like you were just talking about.
Yep.
Knowing that I'm dedicated to it, my players go, he's making it up.
Oh,
That's
sure.
not a good thing. That's not a good thing. He's making it up, and it lacks that. Ooh, I should dig into this. Where you have thief number one comes up to you and talks to you. The level of detail that you put into preparation for that can be the difference between oh, it's a thief, and oh wow, he's part of this greater syndicate, and there's things I can get into,
Yeah.
you know.
That's huge. Definitely as DMs in general, right? I have a lot more experience as a dungeon master than you do. And
That's for sure.
I'm not saying that what you're doing is wrong. Just any way that people DM, as long as you're having fun and as long as your players are having fun, then you're doing it right. But
True.
don't be afraid to take those pre-made things and to change it. And that is something that I also struggle with, and is also why I don't do pre-made things, because I know personally it is a lot easier for me to make up the Serene Undine Republic and who runs the place and where the cities are and what their theme or culture is like than to take, let's say, the Pathfinder. Oh, I don't know. I had it and I forgot about it. Wrath of the Righteous. That's what it was. The Wrath of the Righteous adventure path. I've played in it and it's really cool, but it's already structured, and I find it much harder to when things are in print, like actual print. First off, I don't write in books. I don't do that. It's a cardinal sin to me. But also, I can't be like, well, that's in print, and if I change something and I write it down somewhere, I'm gonna look back at the book in the game 3 sessions later and forget that I changed that thing, and I just won't look at my note or whatever. And I'm like, wow, why is there some disconnect in my brain? I don't understand why. Well, fuck it, whatever. I've got the book here. Let's go. So that's why
Yeah.
I homebrew all the time.
Yeah. Well, that's one reason you homebrew all the
Oh,
time.
yes, you're right. That is one of the myriad reasons. Um,
Yeah.
and as DMs, people shouldn't be afraid to. Even better is if you are homebrewing like we are. If you see something in a module that you like, just pull it out of the module. It's okay. You're
Oh, for sure.
that's so
Um,
much better.
I can't wait to use. I mean, that's not to say I don't still purchase the pre-made modules because I certainly do.
Yeah.
Uh, I need to use something out of. Wait, let me. I'm looking at my stack of books right now. It is. Where is it? Good grief! The Giants one. It's got Giants. Storm Kings. Oh, it's on the
Oh,
very bottom of my stack, and I can't see it from my chair. Storm King's Thunder or something like that.
I know exactly what
Yeah,
you're
Storm
talking about.
King's Thunder. Yeah,
Yep.
that one. I really want to use that. Man, I love Giants, and I really love the room. There's a spoilers
Yeah. Spoiler alert for. There you go. Skip ahead another
for Storm
5
King's
minutes.
Thunder. There's a room you go to, and it's got multiple different little altar kind of things or symbols,
Yeah.
uh, and you're gonna interact with one, and that'll take you to the realm of whatever set of giants or whatever it is. That and somebody who played Sword Games Thunder is be like, oh my god, he's so wrong. It's okay, it doesn't matter. The point is, I'm reading through that book, going, wow, that's a really neat idea. I want to use that, but I don't want to play this module
Yeah.
because I'm not in Forgotten Realms. I'm in a Forgotten Realms esque
Yeah.
place
Yep.
where I can control some things because I'm lazy. Just call it what it is, lazy. I'm lazy, and I'm not going to memorize everything, and I don't want to screw it up. And my players want me to make it. That's another
Yeah.
thing. Going to bridge topics real quick.
No, no, do it.
But my players, they want to play in a homebrew. They want to play in a homebrew, and they don't know Forgotten Realms, right? So they don't know the gods. They don't
Oh yeah.
know the factions. They don't know these things. So I want to take me as a DM. I want to take some of the basic stuff where I can use shortcuts,
Oh
where
yep.
I
Yep. Yep.
say the goddess Saloon
Uh huh.
or Salune or Salunia, however you want to say it, Saloon. I'm using that in my world, and it's an important piece of my world.
Yeah.
Uh, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I have Cyric or Talos. I may or may not have that in my world. I haven't really decided yet. But the
By
point
Talos,
is,
I can't believe this is happening.
by Talos.
Uh,
um, the point is, I use pieces of that in my players. My players, because they're so inexperienced, they don't know, and
right.
it's wonderful. It's wonderful. If I was playing with a different player group, I may have to rename it, or I may have
Right.
to come up with a different way to approach it. Uh,
And
but
and
point of
something.
the story is using those books is wonderful. Please get into those. They have some wonderful stories,
Yes.
great springboards for you. Even if you're not going to play the module,
Yep.
I would say it's still valuable.
Absolutely. And if you enjoy certain NPCs from there, or puzzles or dungeons or cities, use that in your world building, in your nation building. Like, you know what? I really like this character. She is the captain of the guard of this town in the Wrath of the Righteous module, for example. And you know what? I like her enough that I want her to be the queen of my new kingdom. And you know what? She's the queen because she fell through an interplanar portal, and she ended up here, and the people made her queen. Something like that. You don't even have to do that much. You know, if your players are inexperienced or if they've never played through those modules, they don't know any better, and they probably won't know any better. Or maybe 10 years down the road, they'll figure it out and they'll be like, oh, wow, that was pretty cool. I didn't realize that that was a part of the campaign. Uh, believe that your players are intelligent and use that as for all it's worth. But most of the time, they don't have the time or willingness to put that much research into what you, as the DM, are doing.
Very true.
I definitely think it's important to hold on to, uh, don't patronize your players with not only a lack of prep, but with uh, too much too much at once. There's no need to info dump the entire history of uh, the Ashlands on a player if the player doesn't give a damn about any of that stuff. So yeah, you can build that if you enjoy building it, but there's absolutely no reason to share it if they don't want or they don't enjoy that sort of information or gameplay style.
Very much so.
And I think kind of getting the last couple of minutes here, the fun part of nation building for me is being able to set the stage. I like setting the stage for the game. Like you kind of rolling all the way back to your kind of 1920s over the top movies, is that I enjoy making the props and the NPCs of an area and being able to make those informed decisions when the player character rolls up to a guardsman and spits in his face. Like, what's the action that's going to occur? Is he going to get arrested or is he going to get like murdered? You know,
Yeah.
and being able to have that sort of information for that country on hand or in the back of your mind is a boon, I think, when they make a decision, especially if it could be a world-changing decision, especially at the higher levels.
Yeah, spitting it. Oh my gosh, that just brings me back to a previous character that I played in one of your campaigns. It was a bit of a charlatan uh, and high-spoken type individual who meets with kings, and yeah, it's kind of terrifying as a player when you know that what you do is going to change the country. It's going to change the world. It may cause some major issues if you spit in a guy's face,
For
and you're
sure.
pretty sure the DM has thought about what you might do 90% of the time.
And you know what? Yeah, never underestimate what your players will do to your constructed house of cards, because they will always try to knock it down, whether it's purposeful or not.
Not saying I ever did that.
No, no,
Every
never.
every session.
It's fine. And you know what? If you build your player to be that kind of loud, obnoxious personality, you built your character to do that, then fine, then do that. And as a player and as a DM, you guys should have that understanding of like, yeah, this is how this character is going to interact. And if somebody has a problem with that, either be like, hey, that's not the kind of campaign I'm running, or, oh, hey, that's awesome. I'm really glad for you, but remember, there's consequences to your actions. And I think building a rule set or for the nation that you're in, like the laws and whatnot, sure, that can get really nitty gritty, but some of that's important for those more adult players that are more into those either heavier themes or are more willing to explore the consequences of their actions.
Yes. Yes. There are consequences for your actions. So I have learned.
And don't be afraid to redraw your maps between sessions or between campaigns. Nation building can occur in the middle of a campaign too. Just for the last like 5 minutes here, there's a bunch of wars going on in my world right now that the players are not interacting with at all. And as a DM, you can say, hey, they have a time limit of such and such a date. If they don't choose to interact with this story hook, then yeah, this country X is going to lose to country Y, and then the borders are going to get redrawn mid-game, and then eventually they'll come over to a newspaper boy who's got a newspaper with a new map on it. Like that's crazy, and that's something that would be a cool little story hook that you can use. So, uh, world building and nation building doesn't stop before the campaign starts.
Definitely.
What parting shots do you have, Dragon, for our fine listeners?
Uh, don't box yourself in. That's the biggest thing I could say. As a DM, I would say don't box yourself in when it comes to nation building and world building in general, but nation building specifically. Uh, Give yourself the ability to flex, to change, to mold to your characters, especially if you don't know your characters that very well or that well. Your
Yeah,
PCs, if you're not very well acquainted with how they're gonna approach things, so and just go with the flow. You know what? Maybe your players do want that level of detail, and you're not the guy who wants to do it or girl. Uh, you're gonna find out ultimately that if you answer a little bit to what they're looking for, and you're able to suss that out uh, deftly, if you will,
yeah,
like really look at your players, you're gonna have a really great time, even if your players don't match your play style. Sometimes I kind of want to get into political intrigue. I really do. That's how I started. Actually, no joke. That's how I started.
yep,
I wanted to get in depth. I wanted to build all this stuff, and my players were just out to have a good time,
yeah,
which is which is great. And I've found as a DM a way to kind of, hey, you know what? That's okay. Let's do it.
yeah,
Let's go out and have a good time in this way. And that's what it's all about, right? Is having fun. So I'd say
absolutely.
don't box yourself in. Don't limit yourself, and don't refrain from using detail and depth. Really, just you gotta look at the environment that you're in.
Yeah, and that's a really good segue into the next episode. Actually, we'll be talking about writing, just writing in general. Less of the world building necessarily, but being able to write yourself out of the corner that you boxed yourself into, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and among other writing topics such as that. So yeah, thank you guys so much for listening to Double D Design with Demon and Dragon here. And yeah, we'll talk to you guys next time. See ya.
See ya.